Welcome back. The Democratic Alliance is calling on the SANDF and Defence Minister Angie to release an internal report into the 2023 naval disaster near Kommetjie, where 3 submariners died. The incident involved the SAS Manthatisi, which was conducting a naval exercise when large waves swept 7 crew members overboard during a vertical transfer with an SA Air Force Maritime Lynx helicopter. Now, 5 were rescued, but 3 tragically lost their lives. I'm now joined by Professor Abel Esterhuyse, who is a military specialist from the Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Military Science. Prof, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. So the DA has called for the release of this internal report. Maybe just speak to us about the typical protocols of handling such a report within the military.
Well, within the military, it is a question of who has done the report. Was the report done within the military, in other words, within the bureaucracy, or whether that report was done outside the bureaucracy? And if it was done outside the bureaucracy, and in other words, outside the Department of Defense, the defense is actually in a way excluded from, they will be informed, but they are in a way excluded from the process in the way that it will go directly to the minister. And so it is for the minister then to discuss the report with firstly the political domain and secondly the institutional domain, the military.
So how far has this report been discussed, and what are the implications of then it being made public, especially from a public perception point of view?
Yeah, I'm not sure precisely how far in the process the report is. We don't have sight on that, but let me just say, I think there's 3 critical arguments here that one should consider. The first is a legal and institutional frameworks. You know, we're sitting with the Secrecy Bill and the PIE Act. And in the past, we've seen some tensions between the military that invokes national security clauses to deny disclosure and argues in favor of keeping them, it's sort of secret and confidential, whilst the courts have occasionally ruled in favor of transparency. And one should also here perhaps think about the institutional culture of the South African military that traditionally operated in a secretive, hierarchical fashion, with a legacy from perhaps the apartheid era. And then I think there's accountability and public interest issues at play here. You know, we are a constitutional democracy and the military is subordinate to civilian authority. And secrecy that shields wrongdoing undermines democratic accountability. And the families have the right to know the truth, and one don't want the misuse of classified information here. And then lastly, and this is an argument that is often used by the military, arguments against declassification that is linked to operational security, that the disclosure could reveal tactics, vulnerabilities, and procedures that adversaries might exploit. There's the idea of personnel protection, some information that could expose identities of service personnel. And then, of course, there's also international implications. You know, releasing classified information that could damage relationships with foreign militaries or violate information sharing agreements. And if you consider all of this, we are at a point, I should say, that even these arguments are increasingly seen as overused and outdated in democracy, particularly when incidents involve loss of life or possible misconduct.
So you speak about the tensions between the secrecy versus the accountability. How then would you find that the Defense Ministry should find a balance in terms of being transparent with incidents like this, but also just protecting the national security of citizens when putting out such information?
It is a very difficult balance, and I think this is a very important but. We are in a peacetime military environment. In other words, there's very few arguments, I think, that can be put on the table from an operational security perspective. And so, in my perspective and in my professional opinion, if I should say, I think one has to play here on the safe side in terms of perhaps disclosure. The misuse of information is a critical issue in a democracy. And I think, perhaps be open about the challenges facing the military. We know that our military is faced with serious challenges, and I think, cover it up and cover it in a cloud of secrecy when we as a public can actually join hands and come together and put pressure on the authorities to say, do something about our military. And I think it is for the military, our society, it is in all of us, the interest of all of us to be transparent and to put the truth on the table, I think.
So you believe that this particular incident just bears open the issues of transparency and just the broader issues within the military in South Africa?
Well, I think this was a typical training exercise. Let's be honest about it. And I don't think, and I'm almost sure that there was no real operational security issue that's on the table in this case. In other words, there's no breach of operational security in any way. And I would suggest, perhaps I would encourage the military and I would encourage the minister to be open about what happened. I think they will be surprised in how society in general will come out in support of the military and in support of rectifying the problems that's identified in the report.
Prof, before we let you go, of course, our leading story is that of the 249 SANDF members that were deployed to the DRC now having touched base at the Waterkloof base. We were expecting them at midday at the Bloemspruit base, but now we are seeing that they've landed at 6:30 today. Just talk to us about the play out of what we are seeing and what we could expect possibly for those that are still to return. We heard the minister saying that if there was more funding for her department, we could have averted a lot of these logistical issues.
Yeah, I think one also have to be honest here. I mean, for a military, especially for an army to deploy, is difficult. It's a cumbersome instrument of power. So it's not just the case of putting people on the plane and flying them back. They have been deployed in the DRC for quite some time. And so there's a logistic hub. There's quite a lot of administrative issues that ought to be dealt with, logistical issues that ought to be dealt with on that side. So one has to be realistic here. But I think they are starting to come back home. One cannot but to see, of course, and to recognize the irony that they are flying in with an Air Tanzanian plane, which actually highlight one of the critical issues for our military, that we don't have strategic airlift. But at the same time, I think it's time for us to welcome our troops back. It is time for us to allow them time to rest and to bond with their families again. Many of them have been in the DRC for quite some time, up to a year. But as an academic, I should also say I'm looking forward to hear their side of the stories and their experiences. And I think there's quite interesting stories that will come out of that. And it's important that they tell their stories so that we can develop doctrine, that we can rectify the problems that were exposed. So yeah, I think there's a positive reality that we are witnessing and that is unfolding at the moment.
Most certainly. Professor Abel Esterhuyse, thank you so much for your time and for your insights this evening.